You are here for the Brown Bag Lunch Series, which is a monthly webcast held at the lunch hour, sponsored by the Home Depot Foundation and the USDA Forest Service. These trainings leverage local successes by amplifying to a larger audience two model organizations' methods, materials, and approaches. Sessions are planned to last no more than 1 hour, with two presenters speaking on the same topic from slightly different perspectives, each for 10 to 15 minutes, followed by 10 to 15 minutes of questions and answers. This is a program of the Alliance for Community Trees, and I hope if you are not a member that you'll consider joining. Today's session is Affordable Housing and Trees. Affordable housing is about building homes that are accessible to employment and educational opportunities, and that people of limited means can afford to own, operate, and maintain over the long term, creating stable, strong communities. Part of that equation is ensuring that homes are efficiently designed and built in a sustainable way to minimize their environmental impact and to reduce utility costs and create healthy environments, improve air quality, have access to recreational opportunities, and they're safe. And trees play a major role in that. So today's first speaker will be Fred Wacker, who is the Chief Operating Officer for the Home Depot Foundation and has been involved in affordable housing and community development for over 30 years. Prior to joining the foundation in 2003, he held positions including Southeast Regional Director of the Fannie Mae Foundation, Community Investment Officer, and Deputy Director of Community Investment Services for the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta, and National Director of the Neighborhood Program Development for the Neighborhood Reinvestment Corporation, now referred to as NeighborWorks America. He has a master's in education from Ohio University and is a certified urban lender. A native of Ohio, Fred currently lives in Madison, Georgia with his wife and two sons. Fred, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending upon where you are in the country right now. My name is Fred Wacker, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the foundation, but we're fairly new. We're celebrated our 5th anniversary this year, and I joined the foundation about 6 months after it was created. It's a public charity, so we do have somewhat of an arm's length relationship with the parent company, the Home Depot, but do receive a lot of support from the company. What I really want to focus on today, and a lot of it's based on my experience in working both in the tree world and the affordable housing world. And what I hope to do is demonstrate, and show, and explain, and respond to questions on how housing groups and nonprofit tree groups can work together in a very productive way. So I'd like to just start off with talking about the mission of our foundation. It's primarily dedicated to building affordable housing for working families that are healthy to live in and affordable to own in the long term. And some of the key messages that we want to get across when we're talking about our mission is that, how we define affordable housing. And it's one, primarily, that's affordable for people of limited means to be able to purchase, rent, operate, and maintain over the long term. Generally, the families that are served with the resources that we provide to the nonprofit sector earning $50,000 a year or less, and in most instances, it's families and individuals earning under $30,000 a year or less. And you won't see in any of our literature mention of the words green building. We'd like to think of it as responsible building. And what we feel is that by incorporating responsible design, each home uses durable and quality materials, is more energy and water efficient, has good indoor air quality, and is overall a safe place and healthy space to live in. And again, for us, our focus is on affordability in the long term. And kind of the overarching message is that the foundation is committed to improving the overall health of our communities, which not only includes healthy, affordable housing, but also the planting of trees, the restoration of community trees, the building and refurbishment of play spaces, and the revitalization of community schools. Our key goals as a foundation, and we do this through our partners, which I'll mention shortly, is to increase awareness of the connection among quality affordable housing, adequate green spaces and trees, and the overall health and success of our communities. And secondly, to increase awareness that the urban forest is an untapped resource that can be used to help communities deal with the pollution of air and water, cool our city streets, and improve our overall health. Now, I mentioned our national partners. We kind of have two buckets of funding. We have funding that supports organizations at the local and regional level, but a much larger financial support network of funding for our national partners. And I've listed here for you our current national partners. And we invest in these groups simply because they have their own networks. They have better capability than we do to provide technical assistance and really be closer to the action on the ground. We have a staff of 12 people, and we're all located here in Atlanta. So we don't have the capacity to provide the technical assistance or create some of the links between nonprofit housing developers and tree groups that we would like to. So we rely on our national partners, as you see before you. Now I want to just share with you strictly, these are my observations and experience, so if you want to throw stones, you have to throw them at me. And really, again, my goal is to kind of lay out what has worked, what hasn't worked, but really how affordable housing developers and tree groups can work together in a productive way. And in many instances, even still today, nonprofit housing developers and tree groups tend to operate in their own silos. And it's interesting because we learned from our own experience that by us having two program areas, one is affordable housing and one is community trees, that in fact for the first couple of years we were operating in our own silos. And it became clear to us that we need to break those silos down and figure out how trees and housing can be connected to build healthy communities. And we still see that tree and affordable housing nonprofits follow kind of a sector mentality, as do a lot of funding agencies, which I think further promotes this kind of concept of operating in a silo. You know, with resources and commitment devoted to single interests. However, we have experienced in the past year and a half and observed that there are synergies between developers and tree groups, but they rarely have seen the common ground that they may occupy at the same time. You know, instead of collaborating, both groups tend to compete over development opportunities and scarce funding. But there really are benefits to integrating tree planting, land conservation, and affordable housing development. We have seen, particularly in the last 2 years, partnerships between the two groups which allows them to share skills and reduce risk to any one organization. We have seen new funding sources spring from the pairing of tree planting, land conservation, and affordable housing development. And we also, from our observations and in speaking with both groups, have learned that by addressing community needs for affordable housing and tree protection together, and in particular engaging community members in the process, both groups can forge new public and political support. Now, I think right now there's some great opportunities for tree groups and developers to work together. And why is that? Well, First of all, smart growth is prompting new partnerships. Partnerships between unlikely groups in the past are becoming more and more important now because smart growth focuses on the environment, land use, patterns of development, and how do we address the issues of a deteriorating environment. Sustainability really has moved beyond just a mere buzzword to become a way of doing business. At the city level, within corporate America, even within the nonprofit sector. And I also think that green building and green certification programs is really leading the way for providing opportunities between housing groups and tree groups, urban forestry groups, to work closely together. Because in most of the green certification programs, whether you talk about green communities of enterprise or the LEED programs of the U.S. Green Building Council, or even local green standards, trees and housing are an important requirement in order to get that certification. And we have worked as an organization for the past several years with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And they're really starting to grasp the connection between trees, housing, and healthy communities. For the past 2 years, community trees has been on the national agenda of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And they view trees combined with affordable housing as a key element in addressing and creating healthy communities back in their cities. And another interesting development that I think creates for the environment to be more favorable for the two groups to work together is there's a groundswell to inject ecological literacy and sustainability principles into architecture education. In the past, folks didn't talk about trees in architecture schools only kind of as a decorative piece, but they're finding now how important trees and appropriate native landscaping is to creating healthy communities, and has to be part of the design of the community as you're either redeveloping it or building a new one. And then the national affordable housing intermediaries, which I'm most familiar with because of my past work, such as Enterprise, LIST, NeighborWorks America, Housing Assistance Council, the Rural Intermediary, U.S. Green Building, Global Green. They're all requiring developers now to get support from their organizations to incorporate tree and landscaping strategies up front in their project designs. The National Arbor Day Foundation and the National Association of Home Builders has a program called Building with Trees. It's a national recognition program, which really connects the importance of trees with the built environment. And then finally, all around the country, and not only through our work with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, but our visits to different cities, we're seeing that cities are using ecological and economic benefits of trees to guide planning and redevelopment of communities. So I think because of what's going on in the broader U.S. in terms of policy, in terms of collaboration, it really provides for tree groups and affordable housing groups to work together. I just want to show you some examples now, and then I'll turn it over to our other guest speaker. These are all projects that are being developed by nonprofit developers. Every one of them, whether it's new construction or redevelopment, the nonprofit partnered with a local tree group or an arborist that's involved with tree groups to make sure that that environmental concerns, appropriate trees, landscaping was incorporated in the design of the project up front. This is Mountain Housing Opportunities in Asheville. Brand new development. It was one of our national awards winners 2 years ago in the home ownership category. and worked from day one with a tree group and arborist to make sure tree planting was part of the development. Another big initiative going on right now is in downtown Albuquerque. And the developer is the Jonathan Rose Company, working with a local nonprofit housing development group there. This was the original site of the project downtown. It's been totally cleared, except for those trees that are there now. And is going to be a $13 million development. What's interesting about this project is the Jonathan Rose Company and the nonprofit developer said, we have to develop green space as part of this for a healthier living environment for our residents. It's a $15 million development. And as you can see, there's treescapes built in the designs up front. And they actually worked with Tree New Mexico, which is a nonprofit group operating in Albuquerque, to come up with this design, not only to design, but help them decide what were the appropriate types of trees and landscaping to use. As you can see a more detailed design. This is what Susan Probart, who's the executive director of Tree New Mexico, offered in a way of technical assistance for this development. Now, this project is a single-family project in Blacksburg, Virginia, by a nonprofit group called Community Housing Partners. And this is an infill new construction development. It actually was our national homeownership winner in 2007. And key to this whole development was the preservation of the historic and long-standing trees that are in the development. And they actually made the homes to fit around the trees. But again, it was the nonprofit working in conjunction with the local tree group to help design the plan to include landscaping and save the trees that were in the project. This is a project out in Clackamas County, Oregon, just outside of Seattle. If you can see down the street there, these are two historic trees, and behind it are all historic trees. And it's abutted the development against a stream. And they actually designed this whole development with the assistance of an arborist and the local tree group in Seattle to make sure that they were preserving the trees in this development up front. I believe the nonprofit tree group up there was called Friends of Trees. This is just another shot from the other angle of it. Now this picture is Minneapolis. And you could see where downtown is, and if you follow that big, not the freeway on the left, but the main artery coming right down the middle of the page, you get to the four corners there, they're empty now. Actually, this is a before shot of about 3 years ago. But there was a nonprofit group there called Hope Community that partnered with a fantastic nonprofit tree group called the Tree Trust in Minneapolis. And all three of those four quarters are developed with affordable housing. The fourth corner, the upper right-hand one, is in construction right now. But Tree Trust, from the very beginning, helped them come up with a tree design and landscape design, not only appropriate for the development, but to help with creating a healthier environment for the residents that live there. So I will end there, but I just want to say our foundation really is interested in working to create partnerships and link nonprofit groups together, particularly tree groups and housing developers. And I think the environment is there to do that, and that there's a willingness and a greater understanding of how the two groups need to break out of their silos and collaborate together. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. That was fantastic. And I want to echo one of the larger points that Fred made, just about how sustainability really has moved beyond just being a buzzword. Last week I was talking with my friend who's head of the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, and who's been at this just about as long as Fred has, and is in the same kind of vantage to, take the whole measure of the field. And he really also feels like things have moved beyond just being a buzzword. So now is really a right time for us all to be involved in this. Mentioned a couple other examples. We're partnering with U.S. Botanic Gardens this year, who is doing a larger exhibit at their grounds. And if anyone gets to D.C. between Memorial Day and Columbus Day, and can check that out, it's a larger exhibit on sustainability. And there's an offshoot of that, a Sustainable Sites Initiative that you can find online. So thanks, Fred. That's fantastic. And we're going to open it up now for questions and answers. You can ask a question one of two ways. You can either type it online through the question manager, and I can read your question for you, or you can signal to the operator that you have a question to ask, and the operator can tell you now how to do that.
Okay, thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1. Please unmute your phone and record your name clearly when prompted. Your name is required to introduce your question. To withdraw your request, press *2. Again, press *1 to ask a question. One moment, please, for the first question.
And I also want to mention that smart growth is something that we've been partnering with on many levels. We had a webcast on smart growth a few months ago. It was on what Trees Atlanta is doing with the Beltline project down in Atlanta. I'm sure Fred's pretty familiar with that as well. But for all the people on the call who want to hear more about model partnerships that aren't necessarily about funding first, but about advancing the cause of sustainability, developing these partnerships, and then really the rest of the model follows. That was fantastic. And another speaker from Baltimore Landmark Homes, who is a developer, speaking about why these issues are important to him and why he seeks out tree groups and affordable housing agencies to partner with. So any questions from the operator?
No questions at this time.
Okay. We have a question in the question manager. How can environmental organizations reach nonprofit housing developers? Where can we find these developer partners? And we'll throw that to you, Fred, if you have any thoughts.
Well, a lot of times, my experience is that right now the environment is such that the housing developers are reaching out to the tree groups, because a lot of the funding sources that are available to make their projects cash flow to meet the income levels of the families they're trying to serve generally require paying attention and including in the design up front landscaping, including trees. In the case of the nonprofit tree groups like Tree Trust in Minneapolis, Friends of Trees in Seattle, and Tree New Mexico, they actively are involved. The mayors of those three cities have a sustainability agenda and have been invited to serve on an advisory committee to the mayors. So they're sitting in meetings across the table from developers and really get a good sense of what is on the drawing board in the way of housing, commercial development. So they're naturally able to connect with one another and offer each other one another's resources to work on a project. And if you were to ask those tree groups from day one, the first time they made a connection, they're always getting calls now from developers about working with them on designing a tree plan or a landscaping plan for their projects.
Great, and I'll also add that from our end on the Alliance for Community Trees, we really look out for model partnerships that we can broadcast to a larger audience. So when we hear about developers who are partnering with nonprofit groups like the group in Baltimore or the developers in Atlanta, we'll send that out so everyone can hear about it and then take it to their local developers and have something in hand, concrete, that they can say, can we develop something similar like these other groups have? So, definitely pay attention to some of the success stories on our website and sit in on more of these sessions. Brett, do you have any tips on how specifically to partner with local government officials? I know you all do a lot of work with the Conference of Mayors.
Right. For instance, quite frankly, what we're hearing from the mayors is that they know that it was interesting because the U.S. Conference of Mayors first approached our foundation saying, when it comes to budget time, and we always have a lot more requests for funding than we have money available, one of the first things that goes is trees. And mayors are really starting to understand the intrinsic value of trees. It's not just they look pretty, but they help with stormwater management, shading, energy conservation. So they're starting to get it, and they're reaching out into the nonprofit sector, trying to attract tree groups to get involved with them. And what I keep hearing from the mayors are, I wish I'd get a phone call from one of our local tree groups saying, how can we help you? So, I think it's a matter of just kind of getting on the mayor's agenda and talking to them about what you do as a tree organization and how you actually can help enhance the health of the communities that the city is serving.
Okay, and we have a question from a listener. She says, I work at a nonprofit that builds affordable housing and works on open space community organizing initiatives. We see open space as an issue that can connect our residents to the larger community who sometimes do not support affordable housing. Any words on how to use environmentalism to connect neighbors?
Well, I think, and I hear this often, it's kind of the NIMBY response, but a lot of these developments that I showed you today involving our national affordable housing winners, there was, in every case, a resistance on the part of the community to get these developments built. And all the nonprofit developers really involved the community in the design of the units. From the color scheme to the size to the landscaping. And they said it in many cases took, it added a couple months onto the development process, but really engaging communities in the discussion, or residents in the discussions right up front, and taking some time to explain the value of building green and including tree and landscaping coverage in the development, how it enhances the value of their homes and improves the health of the communities. So for them, they reached out very early on as they were designing the project because they knew they were going to get resident dissatisfaction if we're going ahead with the project.
And I'll tack on to that too, that one of the projects that the Home Depot Foundation supports is the Alliance for Community Trees National Neighborhoods Program, which provides grants and technical assistance to local tree groups to support projects that improve public housing in low to moderate income neighborhoods. And all of the groups that we work with, anyone who gets the grant, they're only going into neighborhoods, they're only going into communities where the neighbors have requested this, and there is a strong partnership with those neighbors. So a lot of the groups that we work with, that's what they focus on, is how to engage neighbors, how to convince them that this is a positive thing so that they will then turn around and request it themselves, because if they're not involved on the first and foremost level, then the trees won't survive and the project will fall under. So I also want to thank the Home Depot Foundation for their commitment to advancing that partnership, because it is so vital. Okay, we have another question. Do these developers and nonprofit affordable housing developers provide any funding for nonprofit tree group involvement?
Yes, they do. In fact, every case where I showed you the tree group was involved in helping them come up with a design plan, they were paid a consultant fee. And it was factored into the development cost up front. So, I mean, a lot of folks think of nonprofit, whether you're a developer or a tree group, kind of as a social do-gooder organization, but most good nonprofits, particularly in the housing development world, focus on the bottom line. The only difference between a for-profit housing developer and a nonprofit housing developer is their tax status. And they're mission-driven, but nonprofits realize if you're going to provide a service or you're going to ask another organization to provide a service, you need to pay for that service. So in all these instances, the tree group's got a consultant fee for coming up with a design.
And this will also be something that I think John will get into a little bit, or scratch the surface of, which could be good transition. But I want to check with the operator first to see if there are any questions there.
We have no questions.
Okay, perfect. Well, let's let that be the transition to John. And let me introduce John to you. And get his slides up. John Lanier is the fund manager for the National Development Council's Corporate Equity Fund, one of the oldest national nonprofit, full-service community and economic development organizations in the country. With over 17 years of experience working with low and moderate income housing issues with local government, providing technical assistance, training, financing, and development assistance. He has worked in planning and community development departments in Cleveland and Seattle, and served as assistant city manager in Toledo. John also has published articles in several professional journals concerning low-income housing and community development issues. John, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Let me just try to describe briefly a little bit about what we do and what I do within the organization. I work for an organization called the National Development Council. It's based in New York, and we are specialists in community development finance. We work both in affordable housing and in economic development. And we've been around for nearly 40 years. Within the National Development Council, my role is being fund manager of something called NDC Corporate Equity Fund, which is a fund for low-income housing tax credit projects. We raise money from private investors, and we invest in affordable housing projects. These are all affordable rental housing projects. And we've done about 150 deals over the last 10 years. And I believe we've invested a total of roughly $350 million. Those projects are in 25 different states and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. So that's what I do. Now, I don't really know very much about trees, except, of course, I like trees, like most people. But I do know a fair amount about affordable housing. And so let me just give you some of my observations about how the two might connect. I would echo Fred's comment just a moment ago where he said that affordable housing is really it's a business, and the main difference between for-profit developers and nonprofits is the 501c3 status and the mission that most nonprofit developers have. But at the end of the day, everybody is in business to try to generate revenues, and they are loath to spend money unless they get some sort of economic return from their investment. And it really doesn't matter whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit. People don't like to spend money on projects unless it's for something that's going to generate some sort of economic return. Now, within the arena that you all work in, trees, landscaping, clearly there is a benefit, an economic benefit, to doing a good job in this particular area. Good landscaping and trees make a project more attractive, which means that you should have less vacancy, you should be able to attract more people, and you should be able to charge somewhat higher rents. In some cases, I think you can also affect operating costs, which is something that all operators and owners of rental housing have to be concerned about. If you have a good tree plan, it can actually reduce your air conditioning costs in the summertime. So when you approach people that are in this affordable housing arena, you have to understand that they are really in business. They're not going to do things just because necessarily they look nice. There has to be some sort of economic benefit. But you all are in a position to give them advice. You're uniquely suited to give them advice in that arena and show them how they can use good landscaping to make their projects better performers economically in the long run. And also, I mean, I think good landscaping enhances community acceptance. One of the hurdles that you have to clear if you're in the affordable housing arena is that you have to get neighborhood groups and local public officials to buy off on your projects. And good landscaping makes projects more acceptable. So let me talk for just a little bit about the particular program that I work with, which is called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. This is a program that has been around since 1986. It is the largest federal subsidy right now for affordable housing, and it's a big program. It accounts for about a third of all the new rental housing that is built in the United States, and that is a lot of units. So I'm sure you have seen projects that have been built under the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. You probably just didn't know that they were affordable housing projects. One of the nice things about the program is that unlike some of the old HUD affordable housing programs, there aren't really any cost limits, or states may impose their own cost limits, but they're a lot higher than the traditional cost limits of programs like public housing or the Farmers Home 515 program, which tended to produce projects that were a bit more bare bones. I would say most low-income housing tax credit projects look as good or better than the conventional unsubsidized rental housing that's being built in the same communities. And what you get if you qualify for the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program is an annual tax credit for 10 years. Now, what we do is we actually go out and invest in projects. Because of our investment, we get the tax credits, and we pass those through to investors who are seeking to reduce their federal income tax liability. They give us money, which in turn we invest in the projects, which help pay for the projects. And because we can raise a lot of the money for these projects from investors who are only looking for tax benefits, we can have projects that are very high quality but have very low rents. So the tax credits generate cash that help pay for the project. And if you ask me what's typical, I'd say probably on the low end, 60% of the project cost we can fund with the equity that we get from our investors. And sometimes this can be as much as even 80 or 85% of the project cost. So this is what makes it possible to build very high quality housing with very low rents, because our investors don't expect to get any rental income. All they expect to get is the tax credits. In order to qualify for the program, there are 3 hurdles that you have to clear, and I'll talk a bit about these briefly in a moment, but one relates to the income of the residents, one relates to the rents that they pay, and the final is getting state approval. This is a program that is not run by HUD or the federal government, it is run by the states. And in every state in which you all reside, there's an agency that runs this program, and they get to decide what kind of projects that they want to favor. So, for example, if you were successful in going to your state agency and persuading them that one element of their ranking system for projects should be a good landscaping plan, that's a way for you to get involved in directing how the state's resources go into affordable housing. And it's a way of potentially getting trees incorporated in these projects as well. So when we say low-income housing, a lot of people don't really know what that means. One thing I would like to point out is that low-income housing tax credit projects serve people that are somewhat higher in income than the traditional low-income housing programs like public housing or the Section 8 program, if you've heard of those. Those programs have tended to serve people at the bottom of the income ladder, people with incomes of maybe 20% of the median and below. Under the low-income housing tax credit program, developers have the choice of picking which of the income threshold criteria they want to follow, but it's either 50% of the area median income or it's 60% of the area median income. So, and that's, for example, I think in the Washington, D.C. area, the median income for a family of 4 is about $75,000. If you take 60% of that, then we're talking about, for a family of 4, an income of $45,000 and below. So these are people that generally are working, have probably 1 or 2 household members working, and are not as low in income as the traditional beneficiaries of the old federal housing programs. In terms, this is a program that's supposed to produce rental housing, affordable rental housing, and there are rent restrictions on all the units that are covered by the low-income housing tax credit program, and it's basically, let me just give you an example here. Let's say that the median income for a 3-person household in a community is $51,150. The income limit for a 2-bedroom unit would be 60% of that. Well, the income limit is 60%, and then the maximum rent would be 30% of that. So for a 2-bedroom unit in a community with a median income of a little over $50,000, we're talking about maximum rents of somewhere in the neighborhood of $700 to $750 a month. So again, it gives you an idea of who is served by this program. The income qualification is based upon the income of the individual household. The rent is simply based upon the number of bedrooms. And these projects are all low income on a long-term basis. There's what we call the 15-year compliance period, and then tacked on that is something called a 15-year extended use obligation. So at a minimum, we're talking about projects that are going to remain affordable to lower income people for a minimum of 30 years. Now, the third criteria that I mentioned is state approval, and this program was really conceived initially as a way of giving states the responsibility for running the affordable housing programs rather than the federal government. So the credits are awarded to states. Every state gets a certain amount of credits based upon its population. In every state, the governor designates an agency to run the program, and they get to decide what kind of projects they want to do. So some states decide they want to do family projects. Some states want to do special needs housing. Some states favor new construction. Some states favor rehabilitation of existing. But every state gets to write its own allocation plan, and typically what they have is a point system where they look at projects and they award you points for different kinds of features. Now, I'm not aware of any state that actually incorporates landscaping or trees as part of their allocation program, but there's really no reason why they couldn't. And this might be an entree for your organizations into this whole arena. A lot of these projects are done by nonprofit organizations. I would say nationally, probably at least a third of them are done by nonprofits. In every state, at least 10% of the credits are set aside for projects that are sponsored by nonprofit organizations. Now, low-income housing tax credits are a credit for spending money. You get a credit for spending money on eligible costs, and one of the eligible costs under the program is landscaping. And there are a couple different types of credits that you might qualify for. And let me just kind of I'll skip through a couple of these because there's probably more numbers here than you're really interested in. But if you are doing substantial rehabilitation or new construction, you either receive what's called a 9% credit, and that's each year for 10 years, or a 4% credit. So let's say, for example, you spend $50,000 on trees, on landscaping. This is an eligible cost under the program. And today, the tax credit rate, which changes a little bit from month to month, is 7.92%. Your $50,000 in landscaping expenditures would generate $3,960 per year in low-income housing tax credits. This is an annual credit each year for 10 years, so that would give you a total of $39,600 in credits over a 10-year period. And a ballpark number would be, today from an investor, would be that they would give you 85 cents in cash for every $1 of credits. So what does that mean? It means that you generate almost $34,000 in cash from the investors to pay for the $50,000 in landscaping. So the net cost of doing $50,000 in landscaping is not $50,000. The net cost would be about $16,000. It would be whatever you have to spend minus the money that you get from their investors. There are some projects that are located in what are called qualified census tracts. These are low-income areas or difficult development areas, counties that are designated in each state by HUD. And if you're doing a project in one of these areas, you get an additional 30%, what they call your tax credit basis. So again, if you're spending $50,000 on landscaping, this means you'd have $65,000 in basis, which would generate a little over $5,000 a year in low-income housing tax credits, a total of $51,480 in this particular example, and that would generate almost $44,000 in cash from the investors to pay for $50,000 in landscaping. So, what's the net cost of making an investment of $50,000 in landscaping? Well, it's not $50,000. It's really about $6,000. So when people understand that they can actually get money back for making these kinds of investments, then it becomes a whole lot more palatable. And this just gives you an example of the different kinds of costs that you find in a project that would be eligible for these credits. It includes things like your whatever you pay your general contractor and all your architectural engineering expenses. But please note at the bottom, it also includes landscaping, trees, bushes, planting grass, all of that sort of stuff is considered part of the cost of doing the project and is eligible for the credits and can generate equity to help pay for the project. If you're doing a project that's in, it's what's called a 4% credit project, and they're, without getting into the details, these are usually either tax-exempt bond financed or they are projects that are being financed through the Department of Agriculture's 515 Rural Development Program. They get credits at a somewhat lower rate. And in this particular example, you can see for a $50,000 expenditure in landscaping, you'd get about $19,000 back in equities, which would leave you with a net cost of $31,000. In my experience, there really aren't any affordable housing programs that are directed specifically at trees, but all of the programs allow them as an eligible expenditure. And I think where your groups could be helpful is to try to educate developers, both for-profit and non-profit developers, as to how to use or incorporate landscaping in their projects to help lower their operating costs over time and enhance the appearance, because obviously the more attractive a project it is, the more marketable it is, the more rent you're going to be able to generate, and the less vacancy you're going to have. So, good trees are not only good civic spirit, but it's also good business if done the right way. So with that, I'll throw it open for questions.
Thanks, John. If the operator can open the lines for questions and answers.
Okay, again, to ask a question, press star 1.
And just listening to it and watching this again, I know so many people are going to go to where the presentations are uploaded on our site, and I'll give that link later on in an email. Just because a lot of people are going to go back and want those calculations. And I'll say to everyone too, I met John at an affordable housing conference in Mississippi, and he was just swarmed afterwards by affordable housing developers and contractors who don't know this stuff either. So I think it's just so powerful for the groups we work with, for tree organizations and others doing landscaping, to know that these things exist, that you can then go to the developers and contractors and educate them on that. And I really, I hear two things. There are two different ways that we can talk to the developers and contractors. One are, the programs like this where you can spend $50,000 on landscaping, but really get $44,000 of credits. And the other are, sort of the strategies and talking points. And that's where I want to open it up to John first, because I think a lot of the groups that we work with, when they go to talk to a developer, the tree groups talk about what tree groups know about, while the developers hear what developers know about. So for a lot of the groups that we work with, the challenge is often how to translate what they know into what developers know. And the question that I have is, how digestible does the research have to be that our groups are then taking to the developers? So it's commonsensical that you plant a tree that shades a house, it's going to cut its energy usage, and there are studies to back that up. But there are a lot of studies also on how trees in the downtown business district will increase the revenue of the businesses there, how streets and sidewalks that are shaded need fewer concrete slurry fills and such, so it actually costs less for cities to repair those, how maybe 10% of the property's value is wrapped up in the landscaping. So when we think about those sorts of statistics and talking points and strategies, or I guess talking points, how do we translate those into strategies for talking to developers? How digestible does that research have to be when we go in to talk to them?
Well, I would say that most of these guys, I would guess, know as little about this stuff as I do, or maybe even less. And so I think they would welcome the input of organizations that can tell them, how to make their projects more attractive. I suspect that very few developers, who typically are guys with a construction background or maybe a finance background, know very much about trees and how to use trees as kind of a design element in their projects. And then, even better if you can use them as a way to lower your operating costs long term. And I guess what I would encourage you to do is make connections with people who are involved in affordable housing in your communities. Now, I think there was a question before about how you find them. For sure, it's not that difficult to find the nonprofit housing developers in the communities in which you work, because they're going to be known to the local community development department. And if you went down and talked to the people in your community development department, they can tell you, who's active in your community. And so one entree, I think, would be just to go out and explore, talk to them about what you know. You'll find out what they're doing and explore the possibility of your working with some of these groups to help them in site planning, really. And as Fred mentioned, these people are in business. I mean, if you're a nonprofit housing developer, you're accustomed to paying people for advice. And there's no reason why, if you're providing good advice, you shouldn't get paid for it. So you could be accomplishing your mission while at the same time generating some revenue for your organization. But I would start with the nonprofits because they're probably going to be more receptive or more sympathetic to your approach. I believe most of you are nonprofit, mission-driven kind of organizations as well. And that would be a good starting place, but it's not hard to find them.
And you're re-emphasizing when you go to talk to those developers, talk about the economics.
Well, yeah, I mean, developers too often they have to deal with the requirements. And so a lot of times they see requirements as things that cause them to have to spend money without any benefit necessarily in return. And, good landscaping does cost money. Trees cost money, but it can be something that provides an economic benefit. It can be something that makes the project more attractive long term. And I just know from the projects that we've invested in, there's some you can drive up to, and they've had a good landscaping plan, and after a few years, you can see the benefit of that. They're much more attractive places to live. They have a lot more curb appeal. On the other hand, we had a project or two where the developers ran out of money right at the end and never put the landscaping in, and, it's a dramatic contrast. Without landscaping, these projects look pretty bad. But where you could be helpful to them is in helping them see what you could do with a certain amount of money. And I suspect many times they don't have a good sense of how to go about that. They're looking for advice.
Great. We have a question from a listener. She says, do most state agencies aggressively pursue developers to do LIHTC projects? If a tree planting group wanted to find out which developers are involved in these programs, how would they do this? Or would they be better to go directly to the state agency?
Well, the developers pursue the state agencies. So all state agencies have many more applications for these credits than they can actually fund. But they all have websites. And on nearly all the ones I'm aware of, they will actually post all the applications from developers around the state in a particular round. Most states have, a couple of rounds a year where they solicit proposals. And they will list all the developers who applied for credit. So if you are looking to find out who's proposing to do a low-income housing tax credit project in your community, you should be able to go to the State Housing Finance Agency's website and find it.
Okay. Any calls or any questions through the operator?
No questions at this time.
Okay. Well, here is one more question. Or actually, we have a follow-up. Okay. So, we will promptly end it then at 2 o'clock, which is perfect. So I do also I want to thank our two presenters, John and Fred, for being on this call and for presenting. Their presentations, along with the recorded session here, will be available on our website within about a week, and I'll send that link to everyone who was on the call. I also want to thank our sponsors, the Home Depot Foundation and the U.S. Forest Service, for helping us to put this on. Our next webcast is on adult workforce training, and it'll be on March 20th. So go ahead and register for that. And then finally, we have a survey on this presentation. If you could complete that, there are 6 questions. That would be great, and I'll send a follow-up link on that. So again, thanks to Fred and John, and for everyone who was on the call. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This concludes today's conference. We thank you for your participation. At this time, you may disconnect your lines.